Good day to you. Like any homeowner, myself included, I've set up my home to be as comfortable as possible in the way that I conduct my daily activities around here. And for many homeowners, that includes having a space of the house that's a garage that is just for vehicles. For the most part, like my car right here, I share that with my wife. That's a place that garage is going to occupy my surroundings. When I walk out to class, I have to pass through that garage. I have to get around that car. It affects the way that I conduct my daily activities around here, having that in my life. And when I get in that car, I'm going to be listening to radio because I'm looking for something to occupy my mind. So I reach for what's there. The car is presenting radio. It's part of the way that I conduct my life. Here inside my house, I've got a big screen television. I didn't have a big screen TV until the pandemic. I figured I'm going to be 60 years old thereabouts, so I might as well finally get a big screen. That screen occupies a big portion of the wall in our family room that otherwise might be occupied by paintings or by some kind of floor stand statue or some other kind of object other than a television. And I know people that have televisions, we were this way for a while, that are actually blocking the window. The TV is blocking the window just so that we could get it in there. And at the very least, television is the centerpiece in most people's family rooms where all the furniture is arranged around the television, the couches, the armchairs, etc. Here's another typical scenario, a smaller TV in a bedroom, where you're actually getting ready to go to sleep, laying down on a bed, TV pointing at the TV set that affects where the bed is placed, which is where you spend your time. And now I'm in the office portion of the house where I do my work, my preparation for class, and I have yet another television set with news programs on in the background constantly and other kinds of content that I look for constantly in a search to find really good examples for my classes. That's sort of the way that my life is as a professor of media and media criticism and related classes. But all of this introduces specifically the way that media are part of our surroundings. It introduces today's final subject for the class and final chapter. Not necessarily final chapter. We do have one more, which is a summary chapter. It's not so much of a content chapter, which is this one. And we are studying ecological analysis. Ecological analysis. You know that term, right? Ecology, right? Refers to our surroundings. We think of it as our environment. But in terms of mass media, when we're studying ecological analysis, we're studying the interaction between people and technology. The interaction between people and technology. And I'm very pleased to say that ecological analysis has very strong roots in our department at East Stroudsburg University, the Department of Communication, because if you look at the lineage goes like this. The founder of ecological analysis is a scholar named Marshall McLuhan. We'll talk about him in a moment. Canadian scholar Marshall McLuhan. His disciple, his main student who carried on the tradition in terms of publishing and speaking and thinking, was Neil Postman. Neil Postman, we'll also say something about him in a moment. His student was Dr. Paul Lippert, a professor in the Department of Communication, teaches Intro to Film Study, teaches senior seminar, teaches other classes. They are all, well, not Marshall McLuhan so much, but Neil Postman and Paul Lippert coming through New York University. That's where that school of thought, ecological analysis, is mostly housed. And Neil Postman wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Amusing Ourselves to Death, which essentially said it's not about what we are watching on television, it's about just being on television. We just want to be on it. Now, he wrote his book when TV was the big thing, but the same could be said today for gaming. The same could be said for being on your phone, being on your laptop, being on those devices that deliver media content to us today. It's not so much what you're looking at it. The important thing is being on it, right? Having that phone in your hand and being on it. That's what we're talking about today when we're talking about ecological analysis. Another term for it is medium theory. Let's introduce it now, talking about medium theory and the beginnings of ecological analysis. Medium theory, talking about the medium, right? Not like medium, large, small, not like that, but medium theory about the medium is the medium is the message, is Marshall McLuhan's most famous saying. Marshall McLuhan, the founder of ecological analysis, had this saying called the medium is the message. And it's that very fact that most scholars previously had studied the message All of the perspectives we looked at in the class have looked at the message, with the exception of those perspectives that started to look at the audience. But now we are looking at the medium. The medium is the message. The medium is more important than the content. That's what this perspective is saying, because each medium has unique and fixed characteristics. Like television is really good at television news is really good at telling stories about fires in inner cities because it can show the flames. But radio, not so much. The sound effects don't translate as much, but radio is really good at giving sound bites of politicians, so it's really good at telling political news in some ways, in ways that television is not. Those are unique. Newspapers, the stories can be read over and over and over. They're really good at giving detailed news. Each medium, in essence, has characteristics that are fixed and make it unique. The environment, therefore, that's provided when we access a particular subject matter by going through a particular medium is going to be limited and restricted, which is to say, if you're only going to learn about politics by television, or only learn about it by Yahoo News, or only learn about it by Twitter, or only learn about it by e-entertainment, you're going to then have a restricted knowledge base based on the medium. So we're focusing on the medium. Now let's move to a scholar that we want to highlight in the very early beginnings, even before Marshall McLuhan. This scholar was not going to be considered to be the inventor of ecological analysis, but he laid the groundwork, the theoretical groundwork for it. His name is Harold Innis. Harold Innis, I-N-N-I-S. His book in 1950 called Empire and Communications, when he was a professor of political economy. We don't have that kind of subject title in the U.S. political economy at the University of Toronto, studying politics and the economy as a basis for understanding media. That's what he's doing. And his book was really interested in monopolies of information. Think about that. The monopoly, like a Google has a monopoly of information, does it not? If you do a search on Google, is it the same as a search on Safari or Bing? It's not, right? But more people are using Google, so there's a kind of a monopoly on the information that people get to, not just a monopoly on prices and things, but on information itself. And Harold Innis talked about time-based media as being very, very typical of oral or tribal civilizations. These are civilizations before we had the written language. In fact, you'll find that much of ecological analysis looks at the introduction of the written language as a starting point where a technology, written language as a technology, becomes part of our surroundings. And then we go to oral languages when we get broadcasting, and then we're going back to written languages with texting now, and then we're going into new languages with emojis where we have just representations, icon representations. That's a lot of what this chapter has to do with. So Harold Innis is looking at time-based media. Those are media that are in tribal or oral civilizations where communication needed a lot of heavy materials to transport it. If you have a message, in the early days, I hope you remember from your intro to mass media class, you were carving messages on clay tablets, and that's how the message was transported. And then later you had letters through the post office, needed to be transported, right, until the internet comes along and that goes away. But civilizations that had to transport, civilizations that were time-based in terms of their media because the messages had to be transported, they tended to be independent and autonomous, but at the same time they favor religious figures and community elders because their reliance on these people to understand the media forms was what held them back from being able to be completely independent and autonomous on their own because they didn't have access to literacy to know what the tablets were saying. So time-based media, oral-based media is very different from media we have today, which Harold Innis would classify as space-based media. Space-based media, these media are more inclined towards secularism, less reliance on a divine person like we just spoke about earlier to understand. And these societies have rapid change. In these societies, media can reach people over long distances very rapidly. That's our society today. And so Harold Innis got the idea started of technology, in this case the alphabet, and orality being replaced by the alphabet, coming into our lives and affecting it. So then we get Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan, he's living from 1911 to 1980. His book in 1962 called The Gutenberg Galaxy, The Making of Typographic Man, unfortunately it should be woman, a man. It's a study of the printing press. You know the printing press, right? The Gutenberg printing press. That's sort of the foundation of mass media. To know about that, right? It was the 1700s. Johannes Gutenberg invented the first machine to mass produce a message. At first it was newspapers and newsletters, and then it was newspapers and then books. And it was the first time really you have the ability to disperse a message to masses of people who don't know each other. They live in different towns, cities, countries. First time, right? So Marshall McLuhan took a look at the impact of that profound change in the way that humans communicate. And he's got this book, The Gutenberg Galaxy. And he's making the point in this book that technologies modify our form of thought. Yes, they do. If you spend a lot of time on your phone, it does affect the way that you're able to interact with other people. The technology that you're most into does affect not just the information that you get, but it affects your line of thought. That's why in our field, we insist on writing and reading. We're not just about oral communication, because writing is not just a way for you to express yourself that's different from speaking or putting together a video or using an emoji. Writing also develops a certain way of thinking. We call it a linear way of thinking. It's a way of thinking where you can really analyze a problem because you stay with it and you go through it line by line, just like you go through a paragraph line by line. And the information you sit with and you ruminate over, and it really provides a detailed way of linear thinking and analysis and logic that you just don't get from getting all of your information in life through orality. So Marshall McLuhan focused very much on at least raising the question of how technologies influence the way that we think, not just what we know about the world, because technologies are structuring our thought process. And let's face it, a good example is the Age of Enlightenment. The whole world believed that the world was flat and that there was multiple gods, and then they replaced that with one God, and all information came from God. And then because books had a way of thinking that created a roundness to the knowledge as opposed to a flatness, that in and of itself, the medium started to influence the way that people saw the world, and they realized the world is not flat, it's round. And that maybe there are other pathways to knowledge other than through a deity, right? That's the age of reason. And science as an alternative, not for everybody. Some people put religion and science together, but science as an alternative way of thinking and an alternative source of knowledge came about because of the book. And the technology of the book specifically being able to carry it, it's portable. The look and feel of technology is very important in this field. Actually, Marshall McLuhan had this terminology that's kind of confusing to talk about, but it's interesting nonetheless. I think he divided media into a hot medium and a cold medium. And so a hot medium is where the medium extends mostly a single sense, like smell, sound, touch, taste, a single sense. And there's mostly low participation. What you're really doing is you're just taking like a film, right? There's low participation in the film, like very sensory. When you go to see a film today, larger than life, special effects, the character dialogue, the way that people look. You're not talking to the film when you watch a film. Versus, that would be a very, very, very hot medium, sensory, right? Versus when you video game. When you video game, you're really involved, right? Cold medium, that's his second term. A cold medium is much more interactive. It teases the human senses across a broad range. So, continuing on with our final thoughts about Marshall McLuhan, he said that media provide 4 functions for us in terms of extending our ecology, if you want to look at it that way. In terms of taking our body and putting it out further into the environment, that's how he's saying we're using media. One is extension. It's like when you look at television, when you look at a screen at all, it's not just you looking at this phone that's 1 foot away from your eyeballs. It's also that you're using that phone to look out. It's like another eye for you, another pair of eyes, especially if you zoom in on a camera, but also if you're just looking at a photograph that somebody posted on Instagram. It's like taking your eyes and extending the range of them. That's what Marshall McLuhan is saying. He's also saying, as a second function, that we use media for closure. That we use closure, and what that is about is we are pushing other experiences to the side. So, especially video gamers, when they're video gaming, the world does not exist, right? But that can be said for somebody really listening to a song they love with cans on, headphones on. Other experiences, the car crash that just happened, pushed to the side. Homework that needs to be done, pushed to the side. That's what closure is about. Then there's also, as a third function, retrieval. Retrieval is where new media are recast in terms of remaking old media. New media are recast in terms of remaking old media. So the vinyl LP has come back. That went away for a long time when CDs came out. They did away with it. And then people said, you know what, analog recording is much richer for me. And I just love the feel of putting a record on because it's so different than pushing a button on my smartphone to listen to music. I love this is admittedly a very small population, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about recasting a previous form, bringing it back, new colors of the vinyl, new ways of releasing in record jackets, retrieval. That's what that's about. And then finally we have reversal. Reversal is when a medium is pushed to its extreme and it starts to reverse its own characteristics, which is kind of strange. So let's say that your phone becomes your companion. It's what makes you feel safe, right? If you don't have it in your pocket, you're like, you feel somewhat naked, right? I can't feel it. I know I left it at home. I do not feel right. Can't wait to get my phone back. Or when it's not charged, got to get to a charger. Got to get to what am I missing here? Somebody's trying to contact me. I want to see what's going on. That kind of feeling can also reverse itself, right? That kind of feeling of security can be reversed if you're on your phone too much and you start to compare yourself too much to your Instagram friends or your Snapchat friends, or people start texting you and expecting responses who you don't really want to respond to, or if people are making comments about you and posting photos of you on social media you don't want to happen. Now the phone starts to make you feel less comfortable. That's what reversal is all about. All right, another thinker in the area of ecological analysis we want to highlight simultaneously to Marshall McLuhan is Walter Ong, O-N-G, Walter Ong. He was a Jesuit priest. That's a theological scholar studying Catholicism. He was a professor of English at St. Louis University. And his book in 1982 was called Orality and Literacy. Orality and Literacy. And he's arguing that critical changes happen to society because of the shift from orality to literacy, which is to say that when we started writing, when the alphabet was invented and then written language was invented, we had a critical change because in an oral society, the thought and the verbal expression is the most important. And because there is no alternative to understanding a person, there's no written language, you can't make up a grocery list. Because of that, the word is an event that's experienced in the moment. You really are in the moment of a person's use of language in that kind of society versus a literate society. That's a society where reading is taking place. The technologies of writing and print are in place. And that's where a word is an object or it's a thing. It's a thing on my lecture notes here. It's a thing. It's not like an exchange where both of you come together and you're in the moment. A very different kind of structuring of human relations. And you can read about 9 modes of differences of thought and expression. I'm not going to list them here in this video that Walter Ong says that occur between an oral society and a literate society. Very, very fascinating. I'll just mention one of them. An oral expression is redundant because the word is fleeting. Oral expression is redundant because the word is fleeting. See how I had to repeat that twice? It's because I'm telling you the information and rather than reading it. So oral communication tends to have things that are said more often because it's harder to remember in some ways. So there are lots of other comparisons that Walter Ong makes. I'm going to encourage you to really dig into those, and you will have had those if you have senior seminar in our department. Anyhow, Paul Lippert talks for an entire semester about many of these ideas. That will take us, though, to a new area for our chapter coverage, and that is contemporary culture, also known as the third wave, contemporary culture. This was launched by the thinker Alvin Toffler in 1980, and he wrote a book called The Third Wave, and he talked about future shock in it, projecting ourselves into the future, and he said that the computer is spawning this third wave and putting us into the future, and he says that the computer is disturbing time and space once again. You know that for a fact if you've gone back to your past and posted a photo of you that was that your Facebook is reminding you of, and you put it back out there. This is you 5 years ago. Or if you grab a photo of you when you were a baby and put that on Instagram, you're trying to shake up the past. You're chopping up the past. That's not you anymore. It's you a long time ago. That's you trying to revisit that past, but you're using computer mediated communication to do that. So you're disturbing time and space, right? You're going back into the past and you're making it the present. That's what you're doing. And it's never been more possible than ever today with the technology that we have on our phones for hacking things up, for editing them, for changing them around. The defining characteristics of this contemporary culture that we're in now, this third wave culture, which is different from all the previous ecological cultures, ecologies of technology that were surrounding us previously. I'm trying to think of different ways to say it. What makes our time, the time we're in right now, different is we have digitality. That's number one, digitality. And it gets kind of deep here. Toffler says that unlike atoms, digital bits have no color or weight, and they can travel at the speed of light. So the communication takes place rather than carrying a newspaper, carrying a book, carrying a television set, which are made up of atoms, it's really inexpensive and easy to replicate the content that is digitally created. And you know that, right? You can screenshot my video right now if you want to, and you can have a photograph to do what you want with it just from that. You can do the same even on Snapchat, supposedly a fleeting social medium. So digitality is one. And furthermore, that the copy is often almost indistinguishable from the original. Almost. Like you can't tell what's an original anymore in the digital world. Secondly, in this world, the defining characteristic is variability. And that means that the content can be easily manipulated, easily changed around. You could easily take my face and you could make me older, you can make me younger with a software program on Facebook. You give me longer hair. You can make me a completely different ethnicity if you want to. You can change my clothes. You can do it. You know what you can do. It's what's possible. You can have an avatar for yourself. The variability today with how content can be changed. The old days, you're not going to hack up a film. I mean, you might, but you have to get physical. You have to cut up a film. You're going to hack it up and then show it in another theater as a hacked up film. No, it would be preposterous. It just didn't happen today. There's a lot of variability. Also, third defining characteristic of media today in our ecology is interactivity. Interactivity, that means there's a lot of interaction with our media, touching it. Like both of my laptops have touch screens. I feel like I could not do my job of registering students if I wasn't able to hit a link like that and also come down here and type and hit an interactive. We're touching our gadgets all over. You're touching your phone so many different ways. Call comes in, you want to mute, you know where to touch. You want to dial somebody real quick, you want to activate a camera. You want to turn your phone off, you want to turn it on, you know where to touch it, what to do. Once you're on, you know how to scroll, where to touch. There's a lot of interactivity. You're sending a lot of messages back through all of this touching. There's interactivity today. There's texting, surfing, liking, video gaming, scrolling, swiping, copying, pasting, and voice commands. Voice commands to our phones. All of this is influencing content and connecting with others. Yet another characteristic is connectivity. Connectivity where we're always connected, right? You're never out of touch. If you're out of touch and somebody expects you to be in touch, they have the right to get mad at you. Like, where are you? Why aren't you answering your phone? Especially if it's a relative. And part of that connectivity involves, unfortunately, in my opinion, a slew of passwords that you have to know. Oh my God, what's the password? Now I need authentication. The authentication is going to be sent to an email that I can't get into because it's being sent to a device that I don't have that email normally open on. Now I have to go in and get special permission to get into that email through another authentic. You know the story, right? You go through this yourselves. We're connected. We're connected to social networks. We have a network of people. Some people, something of adversity happens to them during the day. Like they're driving, they get a flat tire. They pull over, you got to hear what's happened now. It's like they have to connect that to their social world, their network of people, their friends, their followers, etc., their family. Has to go right out. There's a connectivity that's there. But connectivity is not the same as community, right? Community is where you truly grow up and live around people. Connectivity is, you can have community in the virtual world. Sure you can. There's a community of fans of Phillies, of the Philadelphia Phillies. There's a community there, but it's not the same as living next door to somebody and seeing their son or their daughter, their grandparents or uncles is not the same. Community is built through in-person living, so it can't be. And that takes us to our final characteristic, actually, which speaks to this also, and that's virtuality. Virtuality, that's this whole other simulated world that people are living in or believe that they're living in. I'm still not convinced that you can live in those worlds, but there's no doubt that those worlds generate real sensations and real experiences. To be totally immersed in a music video, to be totally immersed in a video gaming event, to be totally immersed in watching an NFL football game, to be totally immersed in a book that's just inches apart from you while you're snuggled in your bed. That is a real world. And notice how I threw book in there too, right? It's not just electronic media. A virtual world. Is it any less real than the real world? That's for you to decide. I mean, that's what Mark Zuckerberg's new company is all about. Not new company, Facebook. He's calling it Meta, right? Meta. Why? Because Meta is all about, for him, where the real world and the virtual world intertwine. That's what he wants to study. I guess it's a new frontier. We'll have to see where it goes. All right, this takes us to our final item for today, which is the logics of a third wave media. Third wave media world, I should say. Logics of how are these new media remaking our human consciousness? Right? This is an impactful chapter. It's a good one to end with. Kind of builds on everything we talked about before. Our human consciousness, what we are aware of in terms of what we know. Like, what do you know that you know? That's really what we're asking here. So we've got associational knowledge. Associational knowledge is where print media favor causality and temporality. So things happen one after the other. They have to in a newspaper story because one sentence happens after the other. Same on a web page when you have text. Printing favors causality, one thing after another. It's also part of the way that we think when we read a lot. New media favor associations. New media favor associations. That's where you can see Donald Trump and a Confederate flag, Joe Biden and a Chinese flag. Okay, associations are used more. I chose two examples where both people are criticized to try and be equal there. That's what associational. It's a more, this seems to go with this rather than this causing that. That's our human consciousness today. We're saying this seems to go with this. That's what we're being encouraged by the media we are accessing. A second logic of this third wave media world that we live in is contingent. Contingent, which print media make the world more certain. Like if there's a headline, Stalin, there was an old Soviet Union leader, Stalin threatens United States. That's it. That's it. That's what he did. There's no disputing it. Stalin. Let's talk about Stalin. Why? Because he threatened the U.S. It's a fact, right? There is certainty that comes with the print world. The electronic media world is more uncertain. Okay, is the Black Lives Matter movement making progress or isn't it? Is the Me Too movement making progress or isn't it? Is America more conservative or more liberal? These questions come down almost always to, well, it depends or I don't know. Right? That's the world that's created not just because that's the way things are, but also because that's an electronic media world. Because of associational reasoning and because electronic media don't proceed in a logical form like print media. Then also we have the prosumer. The prosumer I've talked about in class already. That's when the interactive media that we access make us producers as well as consumers. And ultimately, working for free. That's what much of the course is that I'm teaching next semester. CMST 340, Critical Perspectives on Social Media Use. It's a 3-credit class, advanced class. We'll be reading, amongst other things, a chapter that I just had published on what I call the focused self. That is how we are using social media today to focus ourselves in ways like never before. And that's a big attraction of social media. But that's also being talked about here by this third logic of the media wave, that is prosumptive behavior. There's a logic that goes along with that you will work for free. You don't even consider it, right? Aren't you upset that every time you type a single key on your keyboard, whether it's your phone, your laptop, tablet, whatever, that info is being gathered and sold? It doesn't bother you that Facebook made $80 billion and Google made $160 billion last year and they don't make anything? They only made that money because you gave them info that they could sell to advertisers, and then those advertisers show up when you do searches on Google, or if you have Facebook, shows up as in your news feed. That doesn't bother you? No, it doesn't, right? I mean, it might now a little bit, but you're not going to do anything about it. You're not going to quit social media because of it, right? That's what this logic says. Nobody's outraged. Maybe in 10 years it'll be different. Maybe you'll be demanding minimum wage for the stuff you're selling to Google without even really realizing it. Maybe you'll be demanding that. Maybe you'll have health care. Maybe you'll have standards for what posture your body has to be in while you're on the computer. Shouldn't that be part of it? You're making these companies so much money, you're working for free. That's a logic. It's a logic that goes with the third wave. No, it's not necessarily the case. And then finally, we have affective logic. Affective logic, that's where the new media are appealing to multiple senses at one time. Multiple senses. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that movie theaters still have not yet incorporated smell. We have 3D. We have certainly our eyes are stimulated, our ears through Dolby systems. And those Dolby systems actually shake our skin, so we get a very tactile feeling from that as well. But we don't have taste or smell so much in those senses being activated. In the old days, the newspapers, mainly your eyes, right? A little bit of feel, certainly not sound. But today, the new media, the electronic media, they stimulate multiple senses at one time when we're accessing them. And this is part of this world that we're living in. This is this third wave media world. And that's going to wrap up our class on ecological analysis. We have one more subject to talk about next week, which we'll be taking on to round things out. But for now, I hope you have a great day.